I've met several dungeon masters through the years who wanted to turn their D&D campaign into a fantasy novel. In fact, most of the DMs I've known share the desire to become famous writers. None of them have ever got that far, though, because writing a book is hard. There are a few notorious examples of adventures that were novelized, however. Did it work out? Well, let's explore that question. Can you turn your D&D campaign into a novel? Against the Giants is one of the best rated and most beloved modules from the AD&D era. In fact, it was written before the release of the original 3 core rulebooks. It is challenging, yet rewarding, and requires players to be on the top of their game to survive. And then TSR allowed it to be turned into a novel, and it was a miserable flop. The premise seems sound on the surface. A D&D game plays out similar to a fantasy novel. It can have all the necessary ingredients: risk and reward, character development, amazing scenery, dangerous villains, and heroic main characters. Even NPCs can lend some appreciated depth and flair to the story as it unfolds. So why can't you take the transcript of a D&D campaign and turn that into a fantasy novel? It's rare to see a book successfully turned into a movie without some major changes. Converting a D&D game into a book faces similar challenges. This is because what happens in a D&D game isn't planned, nor will it likely follow the standard kind of flow and plot points most people implicitly expect to find in a well-crafted fantasy novel. To counter a common assumption, writing a novel is a different skill than running a fantasy role-playing game. But there is one caveat to all this. What happens around a D&D gaming table can provide a treasure trove of inspiration for memorable action and even dialogue. Character names and personalities can come from players who really get into their role. Even NPCs can provide inspiration for your novel's side characters. Ensuring the characters have the expected struggles and development throughout the story requires that the author knows how to write more than they know how to game. There is a connection of sorts between my 4th novel, A Riddle of Scars, and my D&D game. Back in 2019, I came up with a story idea for a book, then decided to play test it within the game of Dungeons & Dragons. I converted my book's plot into a campaign and ran it with a group of experienced players. Now, these players knew that I was playtesting my book idea, but were warned that what ended up in the book's plot was still to be determined solely by me. You'll note that I already had the book idea first, before introducing it to the D&D game. Doing it the other way around is what this video is all about, and this is where my warning comes in. Don't do it. What ended up in my book was more or less the same as the original plot idea I created. Playtesting it with the game of D&D didn't change anything substantial. However, I did introduce a new character to the book based on one of the player characters with that player's full permission, of course. Other than that, the book's plot survived being run as a D&D campaign, and according to the players, the campaign itself was immensely enjoyable. Having gone through that experience, I think it's a fun source of inspiration to take a book's plot and base a D&D campaign around it. Conversely, I've run many campaigns throughout my career as a dungeon master, and none of them would make for a good fantasy novel. I've gotten tidbits of inspiration from the game, and the characters that play around a D&D table can produce some great character ideas, but the plot and sequence of what happens within a D&D game doesn't translate very well from game to book. In the end, D&D should be seen as a potential source for inspiration, but shouldn't be the source itself for what goes into your fantasy novel. If you found value in this video, be sure to click the like button and consider subscribing to support the channel. As always, have fun, stay cool, and keep your dice rolling.